There we go. All right, so it's now recording. So, lean startup, part two, steer. That's what we're going to be covering today. So, just a quick recap. Part one of the lean startup was speaking about products that a startup products that a startup builds are experiments. The learning of how to build and sustain a business is the outcome of those experiments. The information from those experiments will influence and reshape the next set of ideas. Part two is all about the build, measure, learn feedback loop. It's the core of a lean startup. This is how a startup is steered. So we're going to be going into the leap and the MVP portion of this loop. And I feel like this loop definitely has some key points where you're focused heavily more on learning, heavily more on building. But even while you're learning, you're building, and while you're building, you're learning, and it kind of all meshes into one. So first part is going to be leap. So a startup is based on the assumption that it will create a product that customers want or need. These assumptions may appear to be a leap of faith and may start out that way, but they can be validated. It can be validated through a value hypothesis. So customer will find the product valuable, or a growth hypothesis, which really needs both of these to be validated, that the product will grow in the market share. So for an example, this is an example with Facebook. In 2004, Facebook was not the first social media network. It had no real business model and little revenue. You sign up for Facebook for free. Not much money coming in the door, and it only had around 150,000 users. So despite that, venture capitalist still jumped on board with $500,000, and then a year later, another 12 million. But why? Well, because they were able to validate these two hypotheses. The value hypothesis was, users are drawn to the value of the product. 50% of them return to the page daily. I know it was a page; it wasn't on the phone back then. I know some of you guys probably don't realize that, but we used to have to go on the computer to look at Facebook. It wasn't on our phones because the smartphone wasn't even invented until about 2007. So the growth hypothesis validated from its launch on February 4th of 2004 to the end of the month on March 1st. It had gained 75% of the Harvard undergrads as users. So that's pretty substantial growth, and that was actually done without any sort of budget for advertising or marketing. So and essentially, and we'll kind of touch more into this on the next piece, but that's really validated through an MVP, or a minimal viable product. But basically, that's their two hypotheses validated to show that they've got a product that's going to work. Another leap example. This one's more of a leap of faith, where entrepreneurs will say, well, because product X was successful in market Y, our improved version of product X will also be successful in market Y, which that can be kind of dangerous. It is a bit of a leap of faith, but there's ways to validate this also. And this example is using the iPod. So the value hypothesis is what the author refers to as like an analog. It's pretty direct. Do people want to listen to music in a public place on headphones? Yes, the Walkman had already proved this. So that's not, that's a leap, but it's pretty much validated already. And growth hypothesis was not. They referred to this one as an analog, which will people pay to download music instead of buying a CD? Well, Napster proved, and the other networks out there kind of proved that people will download music, but they'll do it for free. So there was kind of a leap of faith here, with would people pay for the music to be downloaded and not have a physical copy in hand on a CD, which proved to be pretty accurate. So leap, the other part to the leap is it's Genshi Genbutsu, or for the Gaijin, real location, real thing. It's a Japanese term, really stolen from Toyota. where basically the best example of this is Yoji Yokoya, the chief engineering of the 2004 Toyota Sienna. Toyota's response to how they look into marketing and product development is basically go out and test it, see how things are done. And this is really done in all aspects of their company, where if they have questions, they go out and go on site, evaluate, and see what's needed. So Yuji Yokoya was given the task of being chief engineer of the 2004 Toyota Sienna. He had no real knowledge of the North American market, but he knew that that's where his vehicle was going to be sold the most. So what he did was he implemented Genshi Genbutsu with a 53,000-mile road trip through all 50 states of the US, 13 provinces of Canada, and all parts of Mexico in a current model Sienna. He met with others and gathered feedback, from real customers in the largest market for the vehicle. So, he had the task of making a product for a market instead of trying to, make a leap of faith, a guess, an assumption. He went out to validate what is needed in this market by real world testing without, even really making the next product. He just went and tested the old one of how it could be better. And this resulted with the 2004 Sienna sales were 60% higher than the 2003 model year. And it wasn't, drastically huge changes that he made. It was just, a higher level of comfort, which, in North American market, there's longer road trips. People spend more time in their cars versus other markets. Cup holders, he addressed that issue, which sounds kind of silly to us because every car has like 6 cup holders per person, but that's not really a thing in other countries. So that's, those sort of changes. He met with clients and got actual feedback from the users to how is that going to, be useful to them? Where are the pain points in the existing product? And then another example of the leap would be Intuit. And so back in 1982, which is a very, very long time ago, Scott Cook had a vision that someday computers would be used, consumers would use personal computers to pay bills and track expenses. As of 82, there was not a lot of personal computers in homes at that point. So it was a pretty, big assumption and leap of faith on his side. Now, he wasn't really going to be able to answer that question. But what he could answer was, do people find it frustrating to pay bills by hand? So Scott used a phone book just to call people at random in California, and I believe it was Illinois, to just ask them a few questions about how they manage their finances. The purpose of this was to help answer his leap of faith question of, do people find it frustrating to pay bills by hand? Not, would you pay your bills through a computer? Because these conversations were not designed to answer his main question of bills being paid through the computer. It was just trying to find out that if he could find a way to solve the frustration of paying bills by hand, would there be a mainstream client base? And that was the answer that he was looking. That was the question he was really looking to answer. So, sometimes, the leap might be a solution on how to do it, but really first you have to find out if it's an existing problem. Will your solution fix that problem? So he was definitely ahead of the curve on getting the solution out the door. So through this process, this leap process, really what we're trying to do is create a customer archetype. So these early conversations will identify the mainstream customer and what problems they have. This will give enough information to create a customer archetype or a model to start building a product for. This should not be considered a definitive blueprint, but a starting point. So really it's just trying to identify, are there mainstream clients out there? Is there a real life, a real problem to solve? And is there a mainstream group of clients with that problem? That's what the leap process is about, and really heavily on the learning. There is some building involved, but really the next step is where more building kind of comes into play. But are you guys kind of tracking with this so far? Is it making sense? There's really a leap into it where you're trying to identify, is there a problem, and would my solution or my product fix that?
Yes. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yes.
All right. So then there are two dangers in the market and consumer research. One being analysis paralysis, and the other one being just do it. Analysis paralysis. You can sit there forever trying to understand your client and going way past the archetype and trying to get a blueprint, and really making no progress. There's also the just do it, where you can essentially skip this process and just go full blown to trying to release a product. And that's where the MVP comes into play, the minimum viable product. So what a minimum viable product does is it begins the process of learning. It's not to end the process of learning. It tests the fundamental business hypothesis. So, it tests, people find it frustrating to pay bills by hand. Now it tests the hypothesis they would use a computer to do it, or they would use a less frustrating method to do it. And then it validates the leap of faith assumptions. So what it doesn't do, it doesn't provide a complete and polished user experience. So it's not something that's going to be fully functional, bug-free, and ready to release to the world. It doesn't have an extensive development cycle, because this might just be a bust. So any money put into or any time put into an MVP, if it turns out it's not successful, it's just wasted. But it doesn't mean it shouldn't be a path taken and explored. And it doesn't even have to be usable. One of the examples we'll go into it, definitely, actually a couple of examples. There's no real product there, but it's really, this is learning, while moving the business along in a sense. So the MVP purpose is to continue learning, not to start out with a high quality product. Through the LEAP process, we can identify a customer archetype, but may not have a complete picture of who that customer would be. If we do not know who that customer is, we cannot work on what the quality is. So if we don't know who we're targeting, we can't, identify. If we don't know specifically who we're targeting, we can't say this would be a quality product for them. That's where we're kind of honing in the targeting audience here. And the customer feedback on needs and pain points will drive the quality for the final product. So, this is a concierge MVP approach with a company that was called Food on the Table. They're really, what they were trying to do was create a system that would, their hypothesis would be that family would see value in having meals planned weekly, based on their tastes, and then also budgeted into what they're looking to spend based on prices in the stores, what's on sale, and what's available. So they wanted to have a service where you would log in and say, here's my meal list for the week, and just go to the store with that list and shop. Well, when they started, and they landed their first customer, they didn't even have software. They had 0 recipes in a database, and they had no information on the client's local store. So what they did have is an MVP, or a CEO and a VP of products, that would go to their first client's house each week and perform all the duties that the software would have done for a fee of $9. So they're testing to see if the clients saw value in what their software would provide without having the software. They would sit with the client, understand their tastes, their likes, find out what recipes they wanted to prepare and cook, so they could start their database that way. And then they would go through the local ads at the local store, find out what's on sale and how to keep everything in budget. And then they would go back to the client's house, their one client, and give a shopping list for the week and the list of recipes. So that was the start of their MVP. And they basically continued that until they had 2, 3, 4 clients. It got to a point where, as their client base grew, they built the software and the automation to allow them to take on more clients. So this is really, something where they're trying to, at ground level, understand the client, and then they built the software to the client specifications. So they essentially were the MVP in this scenario. They had no working product at all, just a concept. So, and Food on the Table is still, it's up there today. You can check out their website and obviously it seems to be working quite well for them. So um, the other piece is that MVP should appeal to early adopters. This isn't MVPs aren't really looking for the mainstream clients. They're looking for those that are maybe a little interested in taking on something new, a little bit of risk, something that not everybody has access to. So it has to cater. The MVP has to cater to that client group. So with Dropbox, they faced trouble early on getting investors. Investors didn't see the value in the product. There was other companies in this space where kind of like like the share files of the world, things like that, where it's a cloud storage upload, and everybody can access from the same computer. They all had the same issues, the same problems. They were clunky, slow, didn't work. And investors just kind of looked at it and said, "That's the space that this operates in. That is what it is." So Dropbox, their MVP, they actually did have a product, but their MVP was a 4-minute video, and it was just the CEO sharing the features of the program, using it in real time. And after this, you can go on and if you do a quick Google search, Dropbox MVP. I was going to share it on here, but there's some memes from the time that have a little bit of a strong language, so I'm not going to play it for you guys. But it kind of gives an insight as to, like, this is literally just a video of him using the product in a very casual manner, showing, hey, this is what it does. He doesn't even get into like tech information of to how it does it, why it does it, and all that stuff. They released the video and they went from 5,000 interested beta users to 75,000 overnight, just from this one simple video being shared of, this is a low hassle product that you can use. And they were just kind of overwhelmed. Now, Dropbox is a huge company, with a value, I believe it's over $1 billion at this point. And that was all kicked off by a 4-minute video to share. So, an example, another again, of an MVP does not need to be a complete product. Aardvark was a result of multiple MVP attempts to answer the question: would customers see the value in a search engine that can answer subjective questions? So, there's the facts and information are all on Google. How tall is this building? How long is this distance? Anything that can be measured. But when it comes down to what's the most beautiful statue in the world, or what's the best restaurant to eat in this state, that's subjective, and Google really can't answer that. So the plan was for a product that would be built using AI and computer algorithms, which this is something that was going on in early 2000s, way before AI was really coming into light. So the MVP was completed with people filling in the spaces for the missing AI and undeveloped algorithms. So you would literally go into Aardvark and you would type in your question, and it was more of like a community chat where you would get a response. You would put in your question like, "Hey, I'm in Seattle. Where do I get the best pasta?" And it would actually link with somebody in Seattle, and they'd type in, "Yeah, Joe's Pasta is the best place to go." And that was basically filling the gaps of the AI and the algorithms that just didn't exist, which it sounds kind of hokey, but it conveyed what the goal of the software was. Google purchased Aardvark for rumored $50 million. So it definitely hit the mark at that point. It showed that there was interest in the product, there was use and a value that it created, and that was just through kind of like don't look behind the curtain sort of arrangement. So that's kind of the idea of an MVP. It's not a full-fledged product, but it's really enough to test the waters of you have a hypothesis, you can test it with the leap process, but then you need to build something that is their actual interaction from client base. These are just some items that the author brought up on an MVP that I thought it would be interesting to share. Some of them apply, some of them don't. But legal issues, if you're creating something that potentially would be patented, if it's not a process, if it's I think he he used pharmaceutical references in it to start. An MVP could start the timeline for a patent. So it's just good to be aware of that, that you don't run out on something like that and lose a product. Stealing ideas. Some entrepreneurs avoid the MVP process because they're afraid that their idea will be stolen. The author kind of delves into this, that it's also about the right place at the right time, but with the right people. Just because somebody's got the same idea, it doesn't mean that their product is going to be better, or that it's going to be successful. The example he used at one point was Henry Ford. In the early 1900s, there was a long line of manufacturers looking to build automobiles, but he just knew how to do it and what to do. And, it was a pretty common idea to build cars, but his idea and his process on it just really, it was the key, not just the idea of build cars. And then the last one was kind of a reputation risk. Could a poorly designed MVP damage the reputation of a large company? And really, this could be mitigated. So yeah, we've seen some poor choices from companies in the past. It doesn't really take them out. I mean, we all remember Crystal Clear Pepsi and Coke 2 or whatnot. They're both still around. But one way to approach these sometimes is, if a company wants to test out a new MVP, it can always do it under another brand or another name to test it out, and then move it into the the mainstream company name, if it looks viable. So, but that's what I've got on this, and wanted to ask a couple questions. We can go into these once I stop the recording here.